One day, shortly after my ninth birthday, or eighth as the demon counts such things, we had a visitor, our cousin Handclap. He was in his 50s and as lively as a cricket. He was a cousin because we had the same family name of Lee, though we had never seen him before. He said he had worked in the same store with my father and Uncle Brightstar overseas. Handclap obviously enjoyed the respect we gave him. Over tea, he told us he had decided to go back to the land of the Golden Mountain and work a few more years while he still could. As he said, his two unmarried daughters were so ugly that they needed big dowries. But we knew he was going back for another reason. Things had not remained the same in his village as he remembered them. You would say something about a family or a village in the district, and he would say that that was nothing and compare it to something bigger or better that he had seen in his youth. The silk was finer, the air cleaner, the rice sweeter, the fields more fertile, the girls prettier, the boys stronger when he was a young man. And then, too, when he spoke of his home life, he said there were too many women around and too much fussing. Though he had been married since he was 16, he had spent nearly 30 years of his marriage apart from his wife. On the other hand, his face lit up whenever he spoke of the good things about living in the Golden Mountain, for the Tang people had learned to have their own good times there. Mother, of course, asked Handclap to take a small gift over to Father. "I think I've come for a much bigger gift," he said, and handed us a letter from my father. "Make sure that it's your husband's hand," he said. Mother nodded. Grandmother grunted that it was her son's writing all right. Then Handclap picked up the letter and began to read it. "In this letter my father said that he and Uncle Brightstar thought it was time for me to cross the sea. I don't remember too much about what happened after that. I think that mother said I was too young and grandmother shouted that she had already lost a husband to the demons. Then her son had left her, and now she was about to lose her only grandson." Through all of this, Handclap sat unperturbed. I sat bolt upright in my chair as Handclap spoke. "His father wants him to come over now with me. He'll learn the demon tongue better when he's young." "But the demons will beat Moonshadow," Mother protested. "They don't do that so much anymore." Handclap carefully wiped his sticky fingers on his tunic sleeve. "And they wouldn't do it to a child. Even the demons have some principles." Grandmother leaned forward on her cane. "And what if there are some lawless ones? They might not know any better and beat him." "Not while I and the company are around," Handclap said. "And there are always the fighting brotherhoods." "Big talk," Grandmother grunted. "You're like the blind man who catches sparrows and calls them phoenixes." "And besides," Mother insisted, "Shadow doesn't want to go yet." It was an important moment in my life, perhaps the most important. I had never seen my father, though I had often tried to picture him from Mother's and Grandmother's descriptions of him. His letters were certainly warm enough, filled with his worries about his and his longing to be back home, but a man cannot be a father in a letter. Mother had talked quite a bit about him, and so had Grandmother. But that, too, was not the same. They were speaking about a young man who had lived in the Middle Kingdom, not a man who had endured the hardships and loneliness of living in the demon land. I knew he made kites, but as marvelous as his kites were, he and I could not spend the rest of our lives flying kites. I was afraid of the Golden Mountain, and yet my father, who lived there, wanted me to join him. I only knew that there was a certain rightness in life, the feeling you got when you did something the way you knew you should. I owed it to father to obey him in everything, even if it meant going to such a fearful place as the Golden Mountain. And really, how really frightening could it be if Handclap wanted to go back? I turned to mother and grandmother. I want to go, I said. And that was that. I won't go through the tearful goodbyes or the boat ride on the river to Canton, the port city, or the first few days on the demon boat. I was young, and I was homesick, and I was frightened, especially of all the sailors, for they were so tall and big and hairy. I thought that they were tiger demons, special tigers with magical powers. Perhaps I should explain here that the Tang word for demon can mean many kinds of supernatural beings. A demon can be the ghost of a dead person, but he can also be a supernatural creature who can use his great powers for good as well as for evil, just like the dragons. It is much trickier to deal with the demon of the Middle Kingdom than an American devil, because you always know that the American devil means you harm. I was frightened, and Handclap did nothing to ease my fear. One fellow passenger remembered a story about demon sailors who had fattened up their Tang passengers. The Tang people had thought it was a good deal till they were marched off the boat into the butcher's shop. And then Handclap said that was nothing, and went on to talk about a ship of tiger demons who plied their trade between Canton and Hell, delivering the Tang men for work there. Handclap cared little about the truth. He loved to let his imagination run wild. He told us about how the sailors had slept upside down on top of their heads with knives between their teeth, and so on. So I could not understand his excitement when we neared the land of the demons. To my disappointment, I only saw a brown smudge on the horizon, as the Middle Kingdom had looked from a distance. There was no glittering mound of gold to be seen, and then Handclap took me below to the hold to rehearse my story for the custom demons. It was the one bit of practical advice I ever got from Handclap. When I came to the customs demons, I was to say I was 8 in the demon fashion instead of 9 as I truly was. I was to use my name in the wrong order, putting my family name after my personal name as the demons did. Otherwise, the demons would write down the last word they heard, so that I would be called Mr. Shadow instead of Mr. Lee. If I had made any of those mistakes, I might not be allowed to land as the son of my father. There was reason to worry, too, for just a few years ago the demons had broken their own laws and turned away over 20,000 of their former guests who had expected to be readmitted. This figure does not even reflect the large number of Tang men who could not get into the country for the first time. The demons, it seemed, were determined to cut down on the number of Tang people living on the Golden Mountain. The demons kept us locked inside a long 2-story warehouse for a week before it was our turn to be questioned. I don't like to think about it too much. We were kept on the bottom story, where we slept and ate off the floors. All the time we smelled the sewage and the bilge of the bay. Besides which there was no way to bathe there, so after the long boat voyage we were rather a fragrant group on our own. Finally, though, when the demons called me for questioning, I found they already had a big bunch of papers on my father. Inside it was the record of his first interview, which ran for some 150 pages. They spent an hour looking at it and then asking me questions about my village and kinsmen. They tried to trip me up so they could prove I was not my father's son, but they did not succeed. Finally, even the demons had to admit that I was who I claimed to be. Then they made me strip naked and took my measurements and poked me all around, and they wrote down all that information on a sheet of paper so that if I ever left their country, no one could sneak back in my place. They put that sheet into a new bunch of papers which were on me. They also added the notes of our interview to that pile. I only got my first close look at the land of the Golden Mountain when Handclap and I were finally released and we stood together before the open doorway leading out of the warehouse where all the immigrants were taken. I saw plenty of hills, but not one golden one, and all the demon houses looked so strange. They were box-like in shape, with no courtyards inside them, as if the demons hated fresh air, but liked being shut up in something like a trunk. The houses had almost no ornamentation and were painted in dull colors, if they were painted at all. The little box-like houses seemed so drab to me that I even felt sorry for the demons who lived in them, for they lived like prisoners without knowing they were in a prison. Handclap had already sent word to my father by a friend who had been ahead of us in line and who had been released the day before, so we knew father and the others would be waiting. I saw all the Tang men standing at the foot of the pier before the warehouse. I clutched my wooden box to my chest. It was about the length of my arm and about a third that in width, and it was a cunning metal clasp with a ring at the end. I would hook my finger into the ring and pull it up, and the lid would open almost noiselessly. This was for my valuables. I played with the catch now nervously, studying the men. They were all dressed alike in either denim jackets or the big black loose cotton tunics that reached to their hips and had wide wing-like sleeves. They also wore heavy blue demon trousers of denim. Some of them wore the cotton slipper-like shoes of the Tang men, while others wore demon boots. They all wore demon hats, with the crowns pushed up full and high and the brims down flat. I found myself wondering which one of them were really Tang men and which might be demons in disguise. Handclap waved toward the one knot of men. "That's Uncle Brightstar." Handclap pointed at a fat old man. He pointed out the rest of our company. I heard him say that they must not have brought the wagon because of the crowds down here and the long wait for us. "And that tall man there," Handclap finished, looking at me, "that's your father." I started to run. The others said hello as I went past them, but I ignored them. I held my box so tightly against my chest that it hurt to breathe. Then I looked up at the tall man who stood over me. He was nearly 5'8", which was tall for a Tang man in those days. He had a long, sharp face with almost elfin eyes. He was my father, and yet he was a stranger to me. I had never seen him. I thought to myself, how can we ever speak to one another? He's as strange to me as a demon. And then my father smiled. "Hello, boy," he said. He knelt down on the pier and held out his arms. I've waited a long time to do this, too long. And I dropped my box and ran into his arms. I had arrived. And that concludes the first long chapter of Dragonwings by Lawrence Yep. Hope you enjoyed it. Think about the questions again. Who are the main characters? What is the problem of the story? What is the setting? And what is the theme? And what is the Middle Kingdom? And what is the Golden Mountain? Until next time, 506ers, take care.